So I'm joined here today with Dr. Lee Berger, and we're going to do a fun interview for everyone to see. So before we start the interview, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself to the viewer so they know a little more about you and your education and work.
Sure. Well, I'm Lee Berger, as you said. I'm a professor of paleoanthropology at the University of the Witwatersrand. I'm the Philip Tobias Chair there, and I've been in Africa for 33, coming on 34 years now. I grew up in the United States, and I'm an explorer at large for National Geographic.
I read that in 2008 your son found remains of what later became known as Australopithecus sediba near the Malapa cave. Can you tell us a little bit more about this initial discovery and the later excavations that you led?
Sure, Kaylee. So that discovery occurred after I started a Google Earth search for cave sites and fossil sites. I had a existing satellite generated and ground truthed map of material that I discovered back in the late 1990s, and then I discovered Google Earth and used it to actually develop a system to find more sites and more caves. And that was a hugely successful thing through the first 6 months of 2008, literally taking our sort of known cave sites in the region just outside Johannesburg from about 120 known cave sites to over 750 cave sites in a period of 4 or 5 months, using the sort of fault lines I could see on Google Earth and using the tree clusters that showed up very clearly on that high resolution satellite imagery. In August of 2008, that search led me back into the vicinity of a cave I've been working at for 17 years called Gladysville. And
Mm-hmm.
right over the hill from that site, I walked into a fossil deposit that was right next to a road that probably every scientist in the region had driven on hundreds of times. And on the second visit back, my then 9-year-old son Matthew was with me, as long as my dog Tao. He credits the dog for the discovery. Um, and I said, "Go find fossils," and off they raced into the bushes. And just a couple of minutes later, he said, "Dad, I found a fossil." And as I walked over towards him from about 5 meters away, I knew that something extraordinary had happened, because sticking out the side of that rock was a hominid clavicle. And I happened to be one of the only world's experts on hominid clavicles at that time. I did my PhD on them. And that would lead to the discovery of a partial skeleton uh, that we would eventually name Malapa hominid. One, Malapa means my home in Sotho language, and then a second skeleton, and then multiple individuals of 2 million-year-old new species of hominid that we called Australopithecus sediba. Sediba means source or fountain or wellspring. Um, and we chose that name because at the time we thought that likely the site was some sort of death trap, and that they were possibly, the hominids were seeking water or something like that. We now have advanced a little bit beyond that. We still think it's a death trap, but we're not so sure it was sort of an attractive spring site or something. It may have had some other sort of usage, but we're working on that still.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, what made you classify this species as different from the other Australopithecines?
So we had so much of it that, one of the things a lot of people don't know who don't follow this field closely is that up until the last sort of decade and a bit, we were a field of scraps. We literally, I think, for a period in the 1990s, there were probably more paleoanthropologists than there were individual fossils that we'd actually discovered, and uh, and we had almost no uh, fairly complete specimens. In fact, you could almost say we had almost no complete bones. Uh, Anyone who's seen something like the famous Lucy skeleton, which was thought of as one of the most complete fossils ever discovered, it's actually very scrappy. There's not that much of it there.
Yeah.
And that was a huge problem for us, and it led to a field that was identifying species, and particularly the type specimens or the first specimen described of a particular species, often on very inadequate fragments, mandibles, fragmented skulls, sometimes even single postcranial remains. With Sediba, we had almost for the first time in southern Africa a hominid from the head to the toes. And we had it in multiple individuals, and the bones were not distorted in any real way. And it was really a remarkable situation. And it was very clear when you looked at the whole bow plan, the whole body plan, and the pattern in almost every area that this was something different. It wasn't one of the very commonly known species we have in southern Africa, like Australopithecus africanus, but it also had characters, which is very primitive hominid in many ways. It had characters that were very advanced that made it look like it might be approaching or could even fall within the genus Homo. In fact, for the first year after the discovery, we really thought we had something closer to Homo habilis than anything else. That's why when we published it in those series of special editions of Science, we called it a Homo-like Australopith. And still today, its position, if you look at it phylogenetically, when they map out where it sits in the family tree, almost every study places it close to the stem of the genus Homo as the possible ancestor of the genus Homo.
That's incredible. So this might actually be one of the species that is ancestral to us.
Yes, I think that's a real possibility. Some people go, oh, but it's only 2 million years old. And we think we have Homo earlier than that. And that's true. There are specimens that we believe predate that have been attributed to genus Homo. But of course, if you know how evolution works, it doesn't, it's not this sort of replacement model, which is a
Yeah.
really, really common mythology
Yeah.
and it's a flaw in the way we teach
Absolutely. I think it's
science.
more like a forked river that comes back at times. Like that's how I
right.
explain it to my viewers. Like it's not a tree branch that ends, it's more of like a river that forks out and comes back at times with
I'd
certain
use the
species.
braided stream idea of,
Yeah.
of evolution. I think is really certainly as we look at almost all animals operate like that. All species operate like that. You can see that by the variation that you see within any genus or any family of animals and humans. I don't think are any different. And I think the molecular record that's now emerging in the past is showing us very clearly that the pathway to where we are today was not a bush, it wasn't a tree, it certainly wasn't a ladder. It was
No.
something far more complex than that.
Yeah. It's also because of the mosaic of morphology that we see in certain species that are reminiscent of later species and way earlier species. So it's that to me shows that it's not, it can't be a ladder or a tree branch. It's definitely something that goes out and then comes back and then helps in the evolution of species, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the story of the evolution of any complex animal is a story of introgressions between species that diverge away. That whole idea of the definition of a species being whether it mates with another one it's I think long dead now.
And we've seen it with the Neanderthals and the Denisovans that we carry their DNA within our genome, so we did all interbreed at times.
That's right. And we also carry mystery species.
Yeah, I know. Like, I'm so excited in the future to see what those mystery species are. Oh. So it's getting close to the 10-year anniversary of the discovery of Homo naledi in the Rising Star Cave system. Can you tell us how the... Yeah, it's been nearly a decade now, like September I read. So can you tell us how the past decade has been for you since this species was discovered?
Well, the Homo naledi journey, Sediba was the discovery of a lifetime. I thought it was like winning the paleoanthropology lottery. And then Sediba came along. And Sediba, and then Naledi came along.
Yeah.
And Naledi has been, there are two parts to the Naledi story. One, it's just been a spectacular science adventure, where we have this incredible species out of time and place and in abundance that I think none of us would have ever thought we would have for any ancient hominid record. I mean, I suppose it's fair to say that probably the record for Naledi is only equal by the Neanderthal record.
Yeah.
And there's probably not a single case of Neanderthals that is, in the abundance that we have for Naledi and that we know is still in that remarkable cave system. So I think that's part of it in the way that we've been able to put this global team of scientists. I mean, it is that project. When you take the Sediba and Naledi projects, and they're really intertwined with each other. When you take them and look at them, they're probably some of the biggest science projects in the world. You're
Yeah.
talking about hundreds of scientists involved with it and producing just a mountain of literature. So it's been a great science adventure in that sense. It's also been a real adventure
Yeah.
because of the place where it was discovered. This extraordinary cave system, the Rising Star Cave system, which was really well known, but of course that held a lot of secrets. It's 3.5, almost 4 kilometers of mapped underground cave system now. Parts of it extremely difficult to work in. Some of the most extreme caving environments that we have, and then there's Homo naledi in these various chambers throughout the system, and now we're finding them in passages and chambers, and clearly using that space in a very special way.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of the stories that are coming in the future are going to be discoveries based around utilization. I often joke to people. I say, I used to say Homo naledi is perhaps the best known hominid species that we have, and we know the least about it
Yeah.
because of it being found only with itself. And the
Yeah.
irony of that, where you just have, you know, there's thousands of bones of this species, dozens and dozens and dozens of individuals, and nothing else with it. I can tell you that that's changed.
Yeah. So for you, when Homo naledi was first discovered, when did you realize that this was a different species? Like, was it early, like very early on, because it's so small? So it's, of course, it stands out compared to the others, but
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, I'm supposed to say, oh no, it took us years of study to
of course.
actually figure out what it was. But actually, we knew we had something really different pretty early on. I mean, within probably the first week.
Yeah.
We were sitting. You got to take you back to that November 2013 excavation, which we broadcast, to the whole world as we did it.
Yeah.
And as the material started coming out, it was clear that the combination of what we were seeing was unlike almost anything we'd ever seen. When the first teeth came out, on their size alone, I had to pause because I thought, oh my gosh, these are humans.
Yeah.
Because we're not used to looking at very small tooth primitive hominids, even though the morphology of the teeth was not human like. There was this pause, and there was a couple of days there where like, oh my goodness. But then you start seeing things like the femurs that came up very early on, and they were clearly primitive. I mean,
Yeah.
they looked like what you would expect. They reminded me when I saw them first of robust Australopithecine femurs that you find
Yeah.
in Paranthropus and things like that. And you started building this really strange mosaic. And then the clincher was when the first skull came out, and you could see that frontal, and you could see this tiny, tiny brain. That was approaching say 450 cubic centimeters, and it was really very small. But you had this face; it looked like well, the brow ridges looked like a Homo erectus. You had by then we could see maxilla that were flattened and looked like maybe Homo habilis. Then you had parts of it that looked like an Australopithecine and clavicles coming up. And it was a big jumble mess. But what was neat is even then we're seeing parts of it articulated. So you knew you weren't mixing, multiple species and that sort
Yeah.
of thing. And the pattern repeated itself. It really was a remarkable thing. So I think we pretty much knew we were dealing with something no one had seen before. And of course, it was in a context that was unlike anything anyone's ever seen before, and still to this day.
So I've researched Homo luzonensis and Homo floresiensis. They are also small species, but they live on a completely different part of the world, like in Indonesia. And while I was researching them and Homo naledi, I couldn't necessarily find that many similarities between these three like hobbit-sized species.
Well, it's important to remember Homo naledi is not hobbit-sized.
Yeah,
Homo naledi is not small.
no, it's not small, but
It's tall. It's tall.
yeah,
It's one of the taller hominids that we have. I mean, the females are probably 4 to 4.5 feet, and males a little bit taller than that. So it's within human range in its
yeah,
size. It's its build that's very delicate and very light. So it's got a very tiny brain size. I mean, if you do the EQ on Homo naledi, the encapsulation quotient, brain to body size, it actually falls underneath chimpanzees. So I mean, it's really, really strange.
yeah,
And particularly as we begin to hypothesize these sort of more complex behaviors in it, it's doing something that's very different. And it doesn't look at all like those island adaptations. Whether that's, I mean, we don't know yet whether Flores and luzonensis are in fact a regional sort of Indonesian adaptation that's widespread across all those islands, which wouldn't surprise me at all.
yeah,
It's clear that they are moving across open water long before that, and so I think I think an important thing to remember is I think paleoanthropology has a bad history of decomplexifying hominid species,
yeah,
in the sense that we have, I think, well, I in fact know that we have grossly underestimated how complex the behaviors of these hominids are. So, is the idea that luzonensis or the Flores hobbits had boats wouldn't surprise me at all.
yeah,
Or at least complex rafts that they could move very readily across open water space. And I think you're going to see that as we move into the 21st century in a world where scientists are more willing to accept animal complexity and the high levels of animal cultures and that sort of thing, we're going to start seeing the de-aping of
yeah,
hominids. And if that's not apes are wonderfully complex on their own, but I
yeah,
think we're going to see there was a tendency or a pattern that we went through to actually turn all the early hominids into just chimpanzees and gorillas. But
yeah.
chimpanzees and gorillas are adaptations to their environments on their own. Hominids or something else, and they're much more complex. So I don't think that Naledi is very much like those at all. It really isn't clear what Naledi's like, to be honest.
Yeah.
Whether some people superficially want to say, oh, it's a little bit like a Homo erectus, it's not really. If there are Homo erectus in Africa, the evidence for Homo erectus in Africa is very poor.
Yeah. No, that's to me like the mystery surrounding Homo naledi is what makes this species so fascinating to me personally. Like March last year, I created a video on Homo naledi. Didn't think much of it, honestly. Like I just created a video of like a simple overview so that people would get a better understanding of the species without giving too much like detailed information, because otherwise that video would have been 3 hours long and it was already like nearly 30 minutes. And that video just blew up. Like it went nearly viral. It At this point in time, it has almost 600,000 views. It's my second best video on my channel. Never expected that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But it was honestly, it was your work on this species that gave me that amount of information to put in a video. So for me, I've been trying to like tweet at you ever since in the hopes that maybe one day I can interview you. Now, this day has come. Never thought that this would happen. But I read that you've been able to get inside the chamber itself. And can you tell the viewers a little bit about what you had to go through to be able to even get inside? Because you're a tall man.
Yeah, that experience, which is still fairly fresh for me, so
Yeah.
I'm suffering a little bit from PTSD. But that was only a couple of months ago. I had to lose 25 kilos in order to actually get into that space, which I did over a period of about 7 months.
Yeah.
I realized that we were publishing a paper which should be coming out very soon on some really extraordinary discoveries related to Homo naledi. But in the course of preparing that paper for submission, it became clear that there were contradictions in accounts of certain largely geological features. I happen to have trained as a geologist. That was part of my background training. And only 47 people at that point had ever been into the chamber.
Yeah.
It's an extreme journey, and you need to be highly skilled, and it's very, very dangerous. And and we've restricted attempts to only those people who had the sort of expertise. But these contradictions were sitting in front of me, and we just couldn't sort out an answer from the 3 or 4 geologists that had been in there, as well as the exploration scientists that had been in there. So I was turning 57 last year, and so I said, there aren't going to be many moments that I'm going to probably in the future be able to make an attempt to get into this extreme space. And so
Yeah.
I lost the weight, and on an expedition that Dr. Kanelwe Moliapane and I were conducting, we were actually excavating Dragon's Back, and we were joined by people like John Hawkes and Augustine Fuentes and others. Which Dragon's Back, for those people who know the Homo naledi stories, is the chamber space immediately before you climb. There's a sort of a climb, and then you descend down what we used to call the chute into the Dinaledi system, hill antechamber, Dinaledi chamber, and the spaces beyond. And I climbed up that, and after the others had gone down, I slipped into the space and tested it out and felt I could make a try. And so the next day I did, and I, believe it or not, survived. It was horrible. I will tell you that. It was the worst experience of my life and the best experience of my life all at once. I almost died coming out. It took me about 17 minutes to get down and about an hour and 10 minutes to get up, 12 meters in that kind of time, to give you an idea. It is, and I've sat and described that space to people for 9 years, and told people how dangerous it is, and that I would never go down there. And it is every bit as horrible as I have described. In fact, I think it's worse. I think that after being in that space, I have an added appreciation for the scientists and explorers who make that journey again and again and again, because it's not. One of the things that we'll be correcting in future literature is that all those maps, if you've seen them that we've drawn of that chute, draws it kind of like a chimney. It's not a chimney. It's a labyrinth. And I think Homo naledi would have moved through that space very differently from how we move through it. We're just moving in the space that a human can sort of venture as they pass down this labyrinth of faults and passages that interlock with each other. And the entire journey is moving both vertically and laterally at the same time. So you don't actually some of the and a lot of that, I think the extreme nature of the space and our inability to get mapping equipment in there, because you're dealing with spaces that are 17, they average between probably 17 and 23, 24 centimeters wide. That's about all you've got in there. So to map those spaces has been very complex.
Yeah.
And as I was in there, I realized that this is this is not it's not a chimney, it's not a tube, it's a labyrinth. And where we enter the chute is probably 5 to 6 meters away from where you exit the chute.
Yeah.
So the ideas of um, uh, the, where the ideas of a body being dropped down the chute and it landing in those lower chambers and those sort of things never would have happened. Never was on the cards.
Yeah.
And I think Homo naledi would have come through there. As I was squeezed in there, thinking I was going to die.
Yeah.
I think Homo naledi would. I had a lot of chance to look around and view it. I think Homo naledi would have come in from many different routes, but what they all shared was that they would have all coalesced into the hill antechamber.
Yeah.
That's really the pinch point, if
Yeah.
you will. And then Homo naledi began using the space after that.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. Sorry, my cat was just like running around and like trying to climb up my light box. Like, he's a
I have cats
baby.
too.
Like, he's a baby. He was born August
Oh, he's sweet.
31st. He's really small,
Looks
but
like a Norwegian blue or something.
he's a British short hair.
Oh,
But
British Shorter.
oh my God, sometimes I just want to, my Lord. Like, he's been climbing up the chairs, which he's not supposed to do. And I can't say anything because we're doing an interview. And he's like, oh my God, just sit still for 2 minutes. Normally you sleep around this time. Oh, yeah, he's fun. So you have been able to be inside the Dinaledi chamber yourself. What was it like for you to be able to be there and to see things for yourself?
So I did a very interesting thing when I was in there. I decided I wasn't going to take photographs. And there were a couple of reasons for that. One was that I've watched that space for 9 years digitally. I've seen it in that way. And I think there's something about looking at something through the lens of a camera that removes you from the space. So what I did was I decided to narrate my entire journey. So I narrated my 4.5 hour journey through there. And that was incredibly valuable because it forced me to describe everything
Yeah.
and really gain a deep understanding for that space. It's both smaller and larger than I imagined. There are parts of it that are much smaller than I thought. And there were some real realizations of, when I landed in Hill Antechamber, beginning to understand how that chamber formed. And it was very different. In fact, people are going to see a fairly dramatic rewriting of the geology of that space after my journey there. A lot of the things that we were debating and had kind of published, I think we're going to have to revise,
Yeah.
like where the source of material is coming from in the interior, the slopes of the floors. It was very dramatic for me too, the separation between the hill antechamber and the Dinaledi chamber, where there's this passageway that I don't think we've described very well either. That's almost 10 meters long. And that may not sound like a lot of distance, but underground, that's a big distance underground.
Yeah.
And that passage, I think, is going to prove very important in the future for interpreting Homo naledi's use of it. It was very emotional for me on a very personal basis. It was a space I thought I'd never be in. I cried, probably also because I knew I had to climb back out and the journey down. There was a point in the journey where I wasn't sure that I would be able to climb back out.
Yeah.
I actually made a decision halfway down to pass through something that I wasn't sure I could get out of. But
Yeah.
I had mentally committed to that space,
Yeah.
and I was going to get there. I made a lot of discoveries, and you're going to be hearing about those. Some of them, it would not be understatement to say, or overstatement to say, they are dramatic,
Yeah.
and are have truly changed our perception of Homo naledi. I of course reported that I found fire,
Yeah.
evidence of fire. There's soot and ash on the ceiling. What a lot of people may not have caught in that announcement was, and this is one of those serendipitous moments in science. As I was in the Dinaledi chamber at the exact same moment, Kanoe and her team outside discovered a hearth. They uncovered a hearth in the excavation. So you had this simultaneous moment of discovery of this thing that we've been saying has been hard to see, and you wouldn't, because everyone told us it was going to be hard to find fire, and evidence for fire is always ephemeral, and it's difficult to prove. This is not difficult to prove when there are
Yeah.
chunks of charcoal and burnt bone and ash everywhere. Turns out it was in front of us all along, and we were making it hard to see. And I think that's an important lesson that I hope your audience hears clearly. Scientists are just humans,
Yeah.
and we can often talk ourselves out of discovery. We can tell ourselves that something's like fire, and fire is such a classic example of that. I've been taught that fire is hard to find.
Yeah.
Everyone read any papers. Some of the biggest arguments in our field are whether this little ephemeral layer is fire or not, or whatever. And so, as explorers, my team and I had convinced ourselves that we were going to have to do this really complex thing to find and prove fire. Fire is everywhere in that system. It's absolutely, there isn't, in fact, I don't think there is a space in that system that we've now been into that doesn't have evidence of fire. That's how widespread the usage
And now
of
that
fire is.
the people that are able to like get into parts of the cave where you can't go yourself, now they know what they have to look for the use of fire. So when you know what you're looking for, it becomes more clear to you that it's just all around you. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the blackening, there were some obvious signs that we just didn't pursue. The idea of blackened surfaces, where you have stalactites and stalagmites, where the older surfaces have been soot blackened and then newer white lime has grown over it. And of course, that's going to let us date those deposits at some stage. And there are parts of that journey that are going to be complex, but the big chunks of charcoal 200 meters back in a cave, and the huge hearths, and the widespread evidence. I don't know if you saw some of the images of what looked like waste pits and that sort of thing, where there's just massive amount of burnt bones. And suddenly, the importance of that, of course, is secondary importance, which I'm sure many people picked up, is we went from having no evidence about Homo naledi's utilization of that space and the external environment to having tremendous evidence
Yeah.
about the animals that they were bringing in and burning, cooking or burning, whatever they were doing with them in those various spaces. Of course, the other thing that was also clear on that journey is they are differentially using spaces.
Yeah.
So the Dinaledi and Hill antechamber don't have animals in them.
Yeah.
They don't have, they have evidence of fire, but not burnt animals.
Yeah, they're more like
And
burial spaces, like sacred burial spaces or whatever you want to call it for them, but
perhaps,
only
I mean,
people were laid to rest there. Just
of
yeah.
course, the moment you say that, there's 200 paleoanthropologists having a heart attack the moment you talk about
Love it.
that level of sophistication in a hominid with a very, very small brain.
Well, that's the fun
However,
thing of me being an amateur. I'm allowed to say things. They can't
well,
come for me.
as I said, there are new revelations
Yeah.
coming that have been made, and I think the way we started this is it's very clear that that we have underestimated almost every aspect of the behavioral complexity of these early hominids. And when I say that, I'm clearly hinting that that many of the breakthroughs that have been made are in that area
Yeah.
of understanding that Homo naledi, that you know what it is about brains. It truly, size doesn't count.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. I mean, we have crows and they have very tiny brains, but they're very intelligent. So I don't think that the brain size necessarily matters. I think the way the brain is organized matters.
I think that is that's not only true, but I think Homo naledi is going to continue to add to our ability to accept that and to
Yeah.
test that and to understand that. What'll be interesting for me, Kaylee, is whether we have grossly underestimated all of the early hominids. How far back does that go? Because Homo naledi is not a I don't, and I still, even though I'm in the middle of this team and I'm this team leader, I still struggle with describing Homo naledi. Is it primitive? That's not a fair term at all, but it certainly is less derived than large-brained hominids in many
Yeah.
ways, and carries characters that if we had found Homo naledi in another context. Uh, I think we would have probably a surface context, for example, we would have placed it at 2 to 3 million years at least,
Yeah.
and yet it's not. Although it may have been. Again, that's an important thing for people to understand. Just because we're finding in it 250,000 years this population doesn't mean that it didn't have its origins at two and a half
Yeah.
million years. And if
No,
it
I
did, it
agree.
could
Yeah.
have been that complex.
I mean, like you said, with that we might have underestimated like the Homo species, but even the Australopithecines,
Oh,
because when
absolutely.
I sometimes make these videos where I look into like ancient inventions. So I've talked about like ancient air conditioning in like Iran, but I also went to look for the invention of stone tools, and I found that the oldest stone tools that we currently know of are like 3.3 million years old.
Namequian, yes, from Cuviphora. That's right. And I suspect that you're going to find in all things that sort of behavior. I mean, for goodness sakes, we have capuchin monkeys
Yeah,
that are making and using tools. So the
yeah,
fact is that I think it's a little bit like my fire story.
yeah,
We've told ourselves what the narrative is going to be, and therefore we go out and find it.
yeah,
And so, deposits with tools that may be much older than that are just not seen, and
yeah,
and often, paleontologists. What I find about explorers and people who discover hominids, I think sometimes they make the error too of not looking for things when they're in deposits of certain ages because they know they're not going to be there.
yeah,
Well, let me tell you what I learned in the Dinaledi chamber. Look up. you
yeah,
know, look around you, because
yeah,
it's that it's the idea that, and I know I'm repeating this, but it's really important to hear that when you convince yourself something's going to be difficult to find or it's not there, you lower the likelihood you're going to see it,
yeah.
even if it's right in front of you.
I absolutely agree. I think it's important for everyone doing excavations on sites like these to look outside of the box, look outside
That's
of
right.
the normal narrative of, oh, we have bones and that's it. No, what's below the bones? What's next to it? What's above
Absolutely.
it? I mean, yeah,
And I hope Homo naledi and the discoveries that are about to be announced will help us break down those barriers and break
yeah,
down the backyard syndrome. If you've heard me talk, I often talk about backyard syndrome, and
yeah,
yet here I was, a classic example of that.
yeah,
Where I say, and what that means for your listeners or our viewers is backyard syndrome is we often don't see the places we know best because that our brain protects us. Our brain sits and works in a way that filters out safe places. And it's why, you're probably finding this as you move out of your apartment. You find a Post-it note on the fridge that you left there 4 years ago, and you're going, "Why is that still there? Why didn't I pull it down?" Because you didn't see it. Because that's a place. And I often do an exercise, which is fascinating with students, where I'll say, "Okay, everyone, you're brand new into this classroom. Look around it, and then we're going to step outside." And we step outside, and I say, "Okay, draw that classroom, and then draw somewhere you're very familiar with: your bedroom, your kitchen, your backyard."
Yeah.
And you know which one they draw better? They draw the classroom better, and that surprises them, with more detail, better refinement, because they think the places they're familiar with they know, but they're not seeing them, because your brain, it's a safe spot, and you don't process it until something's new or dangerous within it. So that's a really, really important lesson. And to your point, um, I, given what we're finding with Homo naledi, I am certain that we need to shift and transform the entire field of paleoanthropology into working much more like forensic archaeological science. We shouldn't be excavating fossil hominids in on the surface deposits any different than you would excavate a forensic body being buried, because there's evidence there, and
Yeah.
we've been missing that evidence. You know, people will tell you how long hominids have been buried. They're dead, and we see it as a recent thing, so that we treat an excavation of a fossil hominid largely like it's a dinosaur dig.
Yeah, like
And
as if it just dropped down and laid there and everyone walked away like, okay, bye. But
yeah,
that, I don't necessarily think that that was the case.
and I think that we've been losing cultural complexity and cultural information by treating hominids like that.
Yeah.
So and I think that, but I think that your generation of scientists, your age group, and the ones coming are much more, are much less prone to sort of carrying the ideology of "this is how it worked,
Yeah.
this is truth." My generation of scientists and the one before me, they had it all figured out. We knew how it was going to work. I mean, you've read some of those papers at the millennium where the field is dead.
Yeah,
There's
I
not going
did.
to be any more discoveries. Let's stop training young paleoanthropologists.
Yeah.
There are careerists out there, and we got to kill them off, because no one should handle a fossil if they haven't done so already.
The
And
thing for me, like for the viewers and people who aren't that familiar with the field of science in itself, most people that have like this negative idea think that everyone is still like that, like back in the day. Like they've got it all figured out. This is the horizon. We can't go past it. Like all scientists think like that. When I have spoken to like you and Professor Per Alberg and other scientists and archaeologists and anthropologists that all tell me we don't think like that anymore. We want to push that horizon as far back as possible, but we need the evidence to do so. We can't just say, oh, human species are 5 million years old just because we want to say it. No, we need to find the evidence, like they found at Jebel Irut in Morocco, most likely the oldest Homo sapien species, or like the fossils that they have found. And that's like 300,000 years old nearly. So
right.
we already pushed back that timeline tremendously in the past, what, decade?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if what's happened in the past decade has been transformational. I mean, all these discoveries we've been talking about are in that time frame,
Yeah,
and if you look at the expanding information, I mean, I think what you're touching on is that we need to ensure that there is a next generation of explorers. We need to we need to get explorers back into the field.
yeah,
We need to get people looking again.
yeah,
We need to change the pattern of all our information coming from a tiny number of what were considered the best sites.
yeah,
We need to be digging the past.
yeah,
And the past is not a infinite thing. These sites are rare, and they're being destroyed by human expansion and and human overutilization of the world, and so there is a need to find them, protect them, and conserve them.
Like I can see that in the Netherlands. According to like our history, the country is quite new because it used to be like marshy lands and everything, like very wetlands. And during Doggerland, we were above water, but after that, we went below water. And now everything, like when we build a house, we have to put concrete poles all the way down. So like sometimes 25 or 30 meters to a sand bank inside the earth. Well, if we can put poles down there, why can't we dig down there? Because that was once above water. That was once lived on. Why else would there be a layer of sand that we can use for the foundation of our homes? But we don't ever dig that deep. We dig maybe a meter, 2 or 3 at most, and then it's like, oh, nothing here. Oh yeah, just build a house, just build an entire suburb, just build an entire town or city. They don't care. But I know from my research that that's probably a layer that we used to live on as humans. And that's information that we're never going to find because now you've built a town or a city above it.
That's right.
That's just lost.
And you're touching on, creative ideas of exploration, and with new imaging tools and things like that you're going to see, I think a lot more adventuresome sort of ways of exploring emerging. There's so many more possibilities. I mean, you'll laugh at this, but when we started the Rising Star excavation, the idea of getting LiDAR into the system was almost like a dream, but it could only fit into, a few spaces. Now the problem is, can you get your iPhone in there?
Yeah, yeah,
it's and I mean, you think of that in that
yeah,
short space of time,
yeah,
and the solutions that have come forward and the power of exploration that we can place these modern tools to.
yeah,
Uh, the next generation and this generation, the next generation is going to have an extraordinary time
yeah.
discovering.
Like I've been saying this on my channel that as our human technology advances, we will uncover way more. And we've seen that in the past decade. Like it's been very evident. Our technology has advanced to a point that we are now finding things and discovering things that a decade ago weren't thought possible. Like the DNA research that we've been doing recently, like the COVID variant, like in the genes of people that have, some people that have certain types of Neanderthal genes were more or less receptive to COVID. Like
That's right.
things like that. Like it's the advancement of technology in combination with the advancement of science and archaeology and just everything. The entire field is growing from it.
Oh, this is, the title of a lecture that I've been giving around the world is The Greatest Age of Exploration.
Yeah.
I really do think we have entered that. I think we are, most people tend to think of it as the age of, when sailing ships would go off to islands and you'd be the first to climb a mountain and the first to find an ancient civilization. Well, I think this is the greatest age because what we're doing now is we have the capability of understanding what we find
Yeah.
and understanding what we see. And that's what true exploration and discovery, scientific exploration and discovery is about.
So I saw you in a tweet, I think, a while ago with Stefan Milo, also a YouTuber. And I was wondering, how do you classify the Homo species? And do you see them all as human species or not? Because I think the viewer is going to be a bit surprised by your answer.
Well,
Had to do it.
There's a funny thing that probably your viewers many of them don't realize. There is no definition of human.
Yeah.
We don't have a definition of human. If you pull up your whatever dictionary or Google it, it's just as easy, and you'll pick up any respected dictionary. the definition will be something like having the characteristics of a person or people.
Yeah.
It's circular. It's like, and it's the height of arrogance that we're a species that, you know, we sit here exploring the past, identifying species in the past. We study them, and yet we haven't advanced the definition of ourselves
Yeah.
beyond know thyself.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
a 2,000-year-old definition is still the best we can do, and it's often because we don't want to.
Yeah.
We look at ourselves and say, oh, we're different. Well, and the reason that that conversation is becoming hot on the internet is that that then stretches to, well, is every member of Homo human? And I take the very strong stance, no. That I think that is, I think, because I think that's a cop
Yeah.
out. And that some scientists might say, well, human's not a scientific term. However, human is used liberally by scientists in the scientific literature. They use it all the time. And if you use a term, you need to have defined it. So it's irresponsible of scientists to use the term human undefined,
Yeah.
because it leaves a gray area. And that's why I jump into those arguments, because I happen to be sitting with a species that is very not human like in its morphology. And by all of the ways that paleoanthropology has set itself up to fail, and one is the idea that morphology has these boundaries, and that these boundaries define species. That's how we discuss these
Yeah.
very species in the past. And the reason that I take this provocative stance that Homo naledi is not a human is I think it's disrespectful to Homo naledi. That's like saying, well, every time something gets complex enough, we're going to allow it to join us so that we cannot do the dirty work on ourselves. We're not going to do the hard work and define ourselves. When I said, well, actually, Homo naledi is the beginnings of what can give you an outgroup. It
Yeah.
can actually tell us that when we share, because it is morphologically, it's not like Neanderthals. It's, Neanderthals, okay, they're human. They they practically fall within our variation, within a liberal aspect of our variation. It was just human arrogance that was keeping us from letting them be as complex as they were.
Yeah.
And so, but Homo naledi is something different. And so it excites me the next years as we begin to truly understand the species, both its behavior, its culture, its presence in the world outside of that cave system. Um, I think it may move us towards the ability to define ourselves.
Yeah. So do you think in the upcoming decades, just putting that out there, that the Homo genus will eventually change and be split into actual Homo species, because Homo means human, it's the Latin word for human. And do you think the older species that fall out of the human sphere will be categorized differently in the future?
We explored the idea of looking at a new genus for Homo naledi.
Yeah.
We just
Yeah,
felt,
I even created a video on that. Like, should it be its own genus? Like, should it
yeah,
be separately?
and we've thought of that for Sediba as well. And I think there's a lot of validity to it. What paused us is this lack of a definition.
Yeah.
But I think that what Homo naledi will give us ultimately is the ability to explore an extinct species, in a way practically as complete as we examine Homo sapiens. And that's a rare opportunity. It's an exciting one. But, I think pretty much that whole package is falling into place of the ability to do that. And in doing so, I think that could that I wouldn't put that off the table at all. That the idea that we should actually narrow the definition of Homo
Yeah.
is perhaps not a bad thing. And there's another reason for that, and it touches on our conversation earlier. The idea that using the genus Homo has been a crutch for sort of slipping, for not investigating the levels of complexity of these species in the past, and just letting the way in which many Stone Age archaeologists just automatically associate tools with Homo.
Yeah.
So it's just sort of, it's a given. And ask an archaeologist who made the Acheulean, and they'll go, "Oh, Homo erectus did." And you go, "Oh, what site have you found Homo erectus with the Acheulean?"
Yeah. Exactly
And
that was going to be my question.
and it's like, because, and they'll go, "Oh, well, it's well established."
Yeah,
And if you're a
yeah,
scientist, you go, "Oh, really? Well, where? Show me that evidence." And you quickly find that that's another one of those house of cards. It's an assumption, it's a story that we've created. And that's why we missed the hobbits, and we missed the, Luzonensis, and Homo naledi's here. The evidence for most of these sort of assumptions is very weak, and yet they are corely entrenched in our teaching, in our
yeah.
narrative. You know, when someone says, "Oh, well, Homo erectus emerged in Africa," and you stop them and go, "Point to me a clear Homo erectus fossil from Africa." One.
Yeah.
And they may have found this child at Dreamland recently, but it's a baby, and it's a little, it's not great as evidence. And
No.
certainly Turkana doesn't morphologically fall within the Homo erectus, nor do half of these other things.
Yeah.
And we've done all these things, Kaylee, that if you go back, I think in 20 or 30 or 50 years, as scientists of that era look back at this period, they're going to look at that period in the sort of 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, a very strange period, where we would find two different things and say, it just proves that this one thing is more variable,
Yeah.
instead of
Exactly.
recognizing that you actually found two things.
Yeah. So, like, I know that they found Homo erectus in the country of Georgia at the Dinaledi cave, or like the Dinaledi site at least. Who's to say they didn't emerge there? And why is
Well,
it such a
it's an
bad
interesting
thing?
thing. And
Like,
again, some people would say, "Oh, is that really Homo erectus?"
yeah,
It's not the variation in that sample is boom. It's gigantic.
but like, why is it such a bad? For me, like, I have the thought, because I have been researching the European apes who lived during the Miocene, so like way back. So that's recently been this thing that I've wanted to research for a while, because I'm wondering, why is it such a bad thought that not everything came out of Africa? And
I
some
think that
things may have emerged outside and then went into Africa and then evolved further. Like, why is it such a bad idea, like bad thought?
I think there was there. I think part of it is. I think there's part of it is a fear that there's a racist trope behind
Yeah.
that concept, and because it has been used that way in the
Yes.
past,
Agree.
and so I think that there can be a little bit of resistance to that right now. But another part of that is sort of a likelihood of event that we see. Africa is massive, and a lot's going on there, but so is Asia. And when this field started, uh, the idea of where hominin evolution had occurred was built upon a European idea that it occurred in Asia,
Yeah.
not in
For a
Africa.
long time. Yeah, yeah.
And it was Darwin who was part of a group of scientists who looked at Africa and said, actually, the African apes are closer to to humans, and therefore there's a greater likelihood there. But that's why Homo erectus was found.
Yeah.
In fact, was the search for the origins in Asia. I think that the molecular record, the fossil record, the cultural record is improving so quickly now as we enter this new age of exploration that we can't. I think we should be cautious about holding on to sacred cows.
Yeah.
But again, we need evidence, and that's why what we need are a next generation of explorers beginning to re-explore Europe,
Yeah.
re-explore Asia,
Exactly.
and get more explorers in Africa. Do you know how many people are actually, you think of paleoanthropology as a sort of widespread thing. I will bet you that there are probably less than 40 paleoanthropologists working on the continent of Africa.
Yeah, that's bad.
I know. I mean, I might be off by a number. I'm not going to be off by much in that number, and so that's bad. You
That's
probably
really
have
bad.
there are
Like, it's
probably
not
more
enough.
paleoanthropologists in Germany than there are on the continent of Africa.
No, that's bad. With my research into like the European apes living during the Miocene, the species like Australopithecus freybergi, Danuvius guggenmosi, Dryopithecus fontani, and like the others. And of course, the interview that I did with Professor Per Alberg last like October, a year and a half ago, with like the footprints at Trachilos in Greece.
Yeah.
I'm looking at these European apes that sometimes are classified as hominin, but they're hominids, I know. For me, it's like the climate changed at the end of the Miocene. It became much colder, so Europe wouldn't have been a viable place for them to stay.
Right.
To me, as an amateur in this entire field, it sounds plausible that they traveled southwards into Africa and then later on evolved further, because I mean species usually keep evolving, because we see that even to this day, and they might have, in my mind, led to what we eventually found as like Australopithecines and other species. It's not necessarily, in my personal opinion, out of the box, but I would like to hear your professional opinion on this.
So we do have species that migrated into Africa and from even the Americas. I mean, horses are a classic example of that. They evolve in North America or the Americas, and then they migrate across Asia, Europe, and then into Africa only 2.5 million years ago.
Yeah.
So so although they survive there today as zebras, they are a late entry that evolved and adapted to the African conditions, as did a lot of animals.
Yeah.
Came out. So it's not impossible at all. It's just a very underexplored record in both places, in all
Yes.
these continents.
Yeah.
It's shockingly underexplored in Asia. It's shockingly, that period is underexplored in Africa, as surprising as that seems. There are apes in Africa at that time period that we know almost nothing about, like Australopithecus from Namibia. That's very far south, and yet there's an ape there, and it's a Miocene ape, and
Yeah.
we know nothing about it, absolutely nothing about it. And so it's right now I think that we have to have an open mind, but we've got to build a better fossil record. We really, really do. Any of your audience that's considering getting into this field, the space is wide open despite what your textbooks say.
Yeah.
It
Exactly.
is. We know very, very little right now, and the discoveries that are being made as we speak are there's that sort of, it's a terrible thing that the clickbait sort of, this changes everything we know about human evolution, whatever, for almost every discovery. Well, you know what? a lot of discoveries that are changing everything we know about human evolution are being made right now.
Yeah.
It's a great time to get into the field. It's a great time to find things. It's a great time to contribute to knowledge, because the idea that there's nothing left to find and we have the story even remotely writ is it's wrong.
Discoveries like the footprints at Trachylos in Greece weren't taken seriously for a long time by people in the field as well. So I think even the people that are currently working in the field need to be more open-minded to new discoveries.
That dates back. See, you have to kind of be a historian of our field to understand, the vicious debate that went around those Miocene apes that occurred in the 70s in our field and was supposedly settled. The idea that bipedalism and a lot of these Miocene that bipedalism is the thing. Firstly, I wouldn't be surprised if bipedalism has evolved many times, and it all doesn't mean that it's a hominid ancestor the moment it's bipedal.
No.
And then some of the things that we shove into the hominin record probably aren't part of that story either. It's well known. I don't think Ardipithecus is a hominid.
Yeah.
I think it takes special pleading to put something with a foot shaped like this into that. I'm not saying it didn't walk on two legs sometimes, but so do gibbons. It's not a. I think that the idea that these things have to be hominids if you find them in Africa is also something that we need to get around. One of my greatest dreams would be to find a Pleistocene ape, because that's what we need, and be able to call it one, because we actually need that. And people may not understand the subtlety of what I'm saying, but there is a legacy in paleoanthropology that everything we find in the African record in the Pleistocene has got to be a hominid.
Yeah.
And what we really need are the ape outgroups again to really begin to define what is a hominid.
Yeah.
And that speaks a little bit to those European fossils and the problems that we encounter there. They suffer a similar problem.
Yeah, because I didn't even know about the European Miocene apes until I spoke with Professor Alberg about the Trachylos footprints. And then in December of 2021, I went to Sweden because my sister lives in Sweden. She's a PhD student of Professor Per Alberg. And I was able to sit with him for about 2.5 hours in his office. And we just spoke about so many things. And one of the things that he mentioned was you might need to look into European great apes from the Miocene. And he just slipped that, like in the middle of a conversation, just let that slip through. And it wasn't until a couple months ago that I actually started to investigate it. Because I was dreaming, and I often dream about fossils. Why? I'm an amateur, why? But I do. And then I woke up with this idea that, yeah, but you're not an amateur. From you, I can expect it. But so I was dreaming about evolution and origin stories and where do we come from as a species, because that's all the massive question we all have. And I woke up with this feeling that it might be older, dating far further back, and we might have the location wrong. So I started Googling, and indeed I came across the European Miocene apes, and I was like, I'm not saying that this is the origin, but it's a plausibility, and we need to look at more plausibilities. It doesn't have to be definitive proof, but it's a plausible story. It's an option that hasn't really been looked at by most in the field. And it's been ridiculed as well, like the idea has been ridiculed. And so for the people researching it, it's been hard as well.
As I say, that I think it'd be valuable to go back and look at that history, and you see where that came from. It comes
Yeah.
from the 1970s and these sort of debates that went on there, and ideas. So I think that you're touching on that commonly people don't understand how science works,
Yeah.
and the sort of waves. If we'd been having this interview 10 years ago, someone like me would still be talking about the thoroughbred Homo sapiens out of Africa, and of course molecular evidence and discoveries have shown that's not true. That we are a complex species, not surprisingly, and part of a very complex history of evolution, integration, and that we discussed earlier. That's so. The idea is to keep an open mind. The idea is make more discoveries, and
Yeah.
but I do think we will have more answers. I mean, hominin evolution is complex.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
And we need a lot more evidence. We don't just need molecular evidence. My genetics colleagues, one of which, congratulations, won a Nobel Prize. It's not all about. It's not all about molecular biology. That's not going to give you every answer. It's the combination of fossils, molecular data, and cultural data.
Yeah.
And having that package, we are going to begin to recreate these. And I think it'd be healthy to start giving a lot of attention to these species and time periods that people haven't paid a lot of attention to, because we know what's going on. I can tell you we don't know what's going on.
No. Like it's, for me, it's the same as with Cro-Magnon, a term I really don't like. It's, I even created a video on why it's an old term that we should all just stop using in the future.
Sure.
Like we all should stop pretending that there was this more intelligent European species, and they were more amazing than all the other Homo sapiens that came from Africa. Like it's, to me, the idea is just ludicrous, and I've been trying to get rid of the term, at least on my channel. If people type Cro-Magnon in my comment section, the comment just disappears. Like it's away. Like I don't want it. Just get it out of here. It's an outdated term, and it was used by people a long time ago who had certain motives that I don't agree with. So things like that, I think in the next couple decades, we will see more changes like these.
Yeah, I think Cro-Magnon is an interesting issue too, because it touches on the suppression of the recognition of Neanderthal culture, and the idea that we needed a human, however that it's a little bit like the definition of human. There isn't one.
Yeah.
And we needed that though, so that we could be superior over this brutish caveman. And we're finding that Neanderthals were anything but that. Neanderthals were every bit as complex as Homo sapiens. You'll notice I avoid using the words like modern humans or anatomically modern humans, or those are terrible terms.
They are.
But they emerged as part of a very serious science, the exploration of the emergence of modern human behavior, which is becoming a joke, as under the idea that at some point, this event occurred where we were here.
Yeah.
And we're finding that, and what that does, that way of looking actually suppresses the discovery of the complexity of other species and other forms.
Yeah. So my entire journey into anthropology, at least on the channel, started with a discovery that was made, I think, around November or December of 2021, where researchers found that large patches of forest were cleared in Germany. So I created a video, kind of jokingly at first, that Neanderthals might have started a rudimentary form of farming. And people thought that I was insane. But now looking back at it, a rudimentary form of farming is understanding that when you drop a seed, a plant grows. And if you want a plant to grow, you need space for a plant to grow, and sunlight and rain. And when you're doing that in the middle of a forest, the canopy is just not making you able to even grow anything. So what if they cleared trees and they did indeed, like when they were scavenging for seeds, they would often fall. And then when they got back months later, plants would grow. So I don't think that they were dumb they were not intelligent enough to understand that. I mean, it's cause and effect. I think they were intelligent
my
enough.
newfound fascination with fire is fire is a very interesting part of the history of archaeology, and this contradiction that we paleoanthropologists and archaeologists have with the way we talk about the existence and origins of fire, and then the way we talk about who used it and how.
Yeah.
And it was always surprising until we announced that we had discovered fire with Homo naledi. If you read the criticisms of things like the deliberate body disposal hypothesis that have occurred, almost all of them say, well, they didn't have fire.
Yeah, I know.
And you look at that and you go, even before we had the evidence of fire, it bugged me because fire dates back well over 1 million years. And I mean, probably over 2 million years, the control of fire. And right across literally 850 meters from the entrance to Rising Star is the site of Swartkrans.
Yeah.
With good evidence of the control of fire over 1 million years old. Who do they think was doing that? What was the cranial capacity of the thing? And you'll ask an archaeologist, who will they tell you was doing that? Oh, Homo erectus. You go,
yeah. It's often that they jump to Homo erectus very quickly. I've noticed this as well. But I don't necessarily think that Homo erectus should be credited with all of that. I think...
Well, and they're just... There's no evidence of Homo erectus.
Exactly. It's just...
What you're hearing, what I hear when I hear a colleague do that, or I see that in a textbook, is they're associating behavioral complexity with big brains.
Yeah.
And this kind of idea that Homo erectus, the Asian version, I guess, has a big enough brain that it falls into it. But for some reason, you're quite right, Neanderthals with their bigger brain, they get left out. They have the opposite neural exclusionism.
Yeah, exactly.
Where and they can't have complex behaviors.
I created a video after that first one on Neanderthal intelligence and skills. And in that video, I mentioned that it is very likely that Homo sapiens in Europe and Asia that went there learned skills from Neanderthals. Because Neanderthals were already living there in those colder climates for a long time. So they probably knew how to sew, because you need to keep yourself warm. It's not just get a bear skin and just hold it. It doesn't work like that. They had probably art, because there's in Spain, they found cave art of at least 40,000 years old. And it's very possible that it was created by Neanderthals. They would sometimes adorn themselves with feathers. That's an expression of art, in my personal opinion. So, I mean, looking at them as simple brutes that lived in caves, it's just so wrong. They were so much more. And it shows in our DNA that they were equal to us. Because why else would we have interbred with them? They were different, but they were at the same time equal to us when it comes to terms like intelligence and skill sets and things like that.
I think it goes back to we're finally beginning to, we've freed ourselves enough to recognize complexity in the past, and can actually celebrate that it's are we going to be, will there be within 10 years, 15 years, will we be using a new language, sort of Australopithecine cultures?
Yeah,
I think that I would predict yes.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. So to end the video with the very last question, you have been teasing the people in December about 3 more discoveries bigger than the discovery of fire used by Homo naledi. Can I ask you to tease the viewers a bit more, or should we all wait until you are ready to announce this yourself?
So I'm in London right now. That's where I'm doing this video from. I'm on my way to Denmark on Saturday morning. So anyone in this field who does a little Googling can understand what happens in Copenhagen and why we're working there. And so watch the molecular space.
Yeah.
That's fairly obvious. You know, we've been on the hunt for that. Homo naledi is an ideal candidate, but not only that space.
Yeah.
Watch other spaces in the hominin record that are big, and obviously molecular discoveries are going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
And they are going to help us truly begin to understand, you know, is Homo naledi related to us, or is it a separate thing? But also other discoveries, if you've been watching those advances, ancient proteins and other things like that, that can give clues to, they can define sex. You know, could you imagine a world where suddenly we had the sex of every individual that we examine precisely? So that, you know, imagine how that changes our ability to understand biology, variation, and that sort of thing.
It changes a lot of things, because with some species they think that they have found like a small male, like a non-adult male, or it should be a female. Like they don't know. Like it's either or. And I'm like...
And what if some of the things we think are male aren't? You know,
exactly. And what if they were...
defined.
And what if a thought to be female or young male currently in like a species, what if they are found to be a male and to be from a completely different species? You just pushed them together because they were a bit similar in certain regards.
So I would watch the molecular space. That's one area where I think that your audience should pay attention to. And I think there's going to be bigger news than that. I know there's going to be bigger news than that. The space, I think I've hinted at it through this entire conversation. The idea that we would never have naledi culture bothered me immensely. It was like a lodestone hanging around my neck, because, you know, the idea that we just found a bunch of bodies in this space and that's what we were going to be left with, that has changed. It has foundationally changed, not just with the fire. It has changed in many ways, and I think that within the next year, your audience will be enjoying a deep and astonishing level of understanding of naledi culture.
That's going to be amazing. I'm very excited for that. So for this video, I want to thank you for your time and to be able to sit here with me and like do this interview. We've actually been talking a lot longer than I had expected. So thank you so much for your time, and hopefully in the future we can do more interviews like these on the discoveries that you've teased a little bit. So thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here.